Welcome. You're listening to Ask the Doulas, a podcast where we talk to experts from all over the country about topics related to pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and early parenting. Let's chat.
Hello, this is Kristin Revere with Ask the Doulas, and I am thrilled to chat with my friend Kristin Brown today. Kristin is the CEO and lead sleep and behavior consultant of Bella Luna Family. Welcome back, Kristin.
Thank you so much for having me again. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and our last conversation was all about potty training, and I consider you our expert. So since you're part of our Becoming course as our expert in potty training, and of course always refer to your podcast and blog with our clients, so thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. And our topic today is one of your other specialties, behavior. So
Yes.
I would love to dive into that. We chatted earlier about some of the typical questions that you get from parents that you work with in regards to behavior. So what is your top question that you get asked, Kristin?
I think probably the biggest thing is do you have anything quick hit that I can do to improve behavior with my child? Because sometimes we get too much advice and try to implement it all at the same time. That can feel a little bit overwhelming, but sometimes it's easy to just focus on one small thing, especially if you feel like you're in a cycle with your toddler or your preschooler where you're just not cooperating very well. And so that thing that I recommend the most is focusing on the positive. And I know that sounds like so simplistic, but what happens is when I don't know if you remember this, or you might even go through it now, but when we're in a difficult phase of our child's development, or we've got a lot of stuff going on in our lives, coupled with our child just going through normal developmental things that are age appropriate for them, it's easy to start focusing on all of the things that we don't like about our child's behavior. And I'm sure you've heard the expression, what we focus on, we get more, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
So the number one thing, and I joke when I say this, but when I start feeling like I want to run away from home, because I think sometimes moms just were like, oh my gosh, this is so much. I don't know how to deal with all of this. When I start to have those types of feelings, I recognize, man, I'm really focused on all of these things that I don't like. And I really need to change my perspective and start focusing on all of the things that my child does and says on a daily basis that are amazing, because sometimes we lose sight of that and we don't give that positive feedback to our little ones, and no one performs or acts better when they're feeling worse about themselves.
So true. Yes.
Yeah. And one of the ways I like to think about it is imagine early in your relationship, if you have a partner, and I'm going to be very gender stereotypical right now, so just pardon me on that, but it's oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking out the trash, right? It was so grateful. And oh my God, that was the best dinner ever. It was so great. And then what happens is we get into marriage or our relationship, maybe we have our kids, and then it's he didn't even put a bag back in the trash can, right? And this again, right? And so what happens is when we start really focus on those types of things, it makes us less likely to want to serve. And our children really do want to make us happy, even though sometimes their behaviors are challenging. And so if we just start focusing on all of those positive behaviors on a daily basis, we're going to start seeing more of that flow out of them. And it really can change the energy in the house very, very quickly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Excellent. So what's next?
So other things that can also help increase cooperation with toddlers is there's really two kind of main things that toddlers need developmentally at this point. And the first one is attention and connection. And sometimes the worst behavior is a call for attention or connection. And this can be hard because sometimes we're I'm with my kids all the time, but we may be doing a lot of different things while we're with our kids, or we might be distracted. And so our kiddos really need somewhere short, even can be 10 or 15 minutes a day, but really getting down, focusing, doing child-led play with them and really filling up that cup of theirs. And that can really help improve behavior, because the more connected our children feel to us, the better their behavior is going to be.
That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. So and if you're having bedtime battles with your little one, I love doing after dinner. I'm shutting off all screens, putting all technology and devices away, and just getting down on the floor and pouring in, because that can make the disconnect at bedtime much easier, because they feel like that cup has been filled.
Excellent.
Yeah. And the flip side of that, especially with our toddlers and our preschoolers, is lots of choices. We control so much of our young children's lives, right? We control who their friends are, where they go to school, what they eat, their choice of clothes, all of that. And so one of their primary needs is to feel like they've got some power. And so the way that we can do that is to offer age appropriate choices, because that way they, once they feel like they have some of that power, they don't have to dig their heels and push back on us so much because they feel like they've got some control over their own lives. I always think about it. Imagine if someone controlled every aspect of our lives and we didn't feel like we'd have any choice. I always think about that, like from our children's perspective, they need to feel powerful so that they have that agency over their own life, but age appropriate choices. So do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? You want to use the green cup or the yellow cup, right? You want to put your shoes on yourself, or do you need my help? Do you want to climb in your car seat and I'll buckle you in, or do you want mommy to put you in there, right? Lots of those types of age appropriate choices really gives kids that power that they're craving.
Excellent. And as a parent of twins, I'm sure that, you've had to navigate big emotions, and giving them choices probably reduces a lot of those tantrums and so on.
Yeah, it definitely did. And my twins definitely like to have, my son and I even had like an incident last night where he's 9, my twins are now 9, and he wanted to cut his own. This sounds so
Oh,
ridiculous, but I also am like so concerned with him like cutting them. And so it's going to affect us. So we actually had like a little bit of a tussle last night, and I had to like take a deep breath and be like, it's okay. We can undo anything. Just give him the opportunity to do this.
right.
And I think one of the other things that's important with choices too is knowing when to use them. So if our kiddos are overtired, overstimulated, or hungry, that's probably not a time to offer a lot of choices because their emotional reserves are low at that point. So offering choices in other times, but sometimes we need to make our decisions for our kids when they're in those.
Okay. So you mentioned mealtime or hunger. What are your tips for managing behavior issues during meal times, whether it's at home or in public?
So from my perspective, I think sometimes we have really big expectations of what our children are capable of doing when it comes to meal times. And so the number one thing is having realistic expectations of a parent, like how long our children are actually going to be able to sit in their seat and stay still. And so I like to use visual timers for children that get up from the table a lot. And so setting it 10 minutes is how long we have to stay at the table, and actually having the child have a visual timer can be really helpful because then they know when they can get up. And that can be a game changer, especially if you have a child that's like up every 1 or 2 minutes. If we're setting small increments of time and, expecting them to just stay there for that amount of time, that can be really helpful. I have a lot of parents come to me and they're like, well, we're still eating and our little one wants to get up. And I'm like, yeah, but they're 2. They can't sit there for very long. That's just not how our little ones are. They need to get up and move. And so I'm kind of letting them do that. If children are throwing food, to me, that means they're done eating. And so at that point, I pick up the plate and say, if you get hungry, you can come back and finish. But when you're throwing your food, you're telling me that you're done. And so that's usually a pretty good indicator. What other kind of things do you hear from parents as challenges that they come up against?
Nap time, certainly, and getting up frequently, complaining, just the struggle with, of course, bedtime as well, but certainly naps.
Yeah, naps can be challenging. And I'm a firm believer, and there's 3 things that children can control. It's eating, sleeping, and going to the bathroom. And so from an eating and a potty perspective, I think children, that should really be child-led. But from a sleep perspective, I think we do have to help our children make choices in that respect. They can't actually make the choices. We have to make the choices for them. And when it comes time for nap, I always like to say, especially to toddlers and big kids, you don't have to sleep, but you do have to rest. And so they have quiet time, whether that's, an hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours, depending on the age of the child, where they're in their room, in their crib, in their bed, where they were having some downtime. And so that way they have the downtime, and how they choose to spend that time is up to them. They can be upset, or they can just relax, or they can choose to sleep, but they still have to have that downtime.
Yes. So, what are your tips when, a child does have those big feelings? What do you recommend parents you work with as far as tools to navigate that?
Yeah. So the number one thing is Sometimes our children's big feelings are very triggering for us, especially if our own feelings weren't validated when we were younger. And so when they're having big feelings, it really can trigger us and it can make us react to those big feelings. And so the first thing I recommend, number one, is staying calm. Because if our child's having big feelings and we get really upset, we're just adding fuel to the fire. And it oftentimes will make the feeling even larger and can prolong any sort of tantrum that could be happening. Second, this is a mantra that I say to myself over and over again when my children are not acting like logically right. I have to remind myself 25 because I remind myself that our children's brains are not fully developed until they're 25. And so when we're expecting them to react in a way that is like logical for an adult brain, I have to remind myself, okay, well, my child's probably may not be capable of my logical, rational adult thoughts right now, right? It's because their brain's not going to be fully developed until they're 25. So that also helps me to be calm and patient because I realize that I'm dealing with someone who doesn't have a fully developed brain. That's going to take some time. And that allows me to, stay more patient and calm, with my child. And then on top of that, just recognizing the feeling, helping our children like name those feelings and then validating the feelings because oftentimes many of us, I was raised by boomers. And so I was kind of the like rub some dirt in it kid generation, right?
Right. Yes.
Like the feelings just didn't, we were kind of our parents didn't get that. And so they didn't know how to give it. And now our generation that are raising children are doing things differently. And we are trying to have more respectful parenting. And so one of the ways that you can really be a respectful parent is just validating those big feelings that your little one has. Doesn't mean you need to give in to if they're having a big tantrum because they want another cookie. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give into that big feeling and just to kind of keep the peace. Just recognize it's okay for your child to have those big feelings, right? And our job is to stay calm and just validate, So I know are some of the most powerful words in the English dictionary when it comes to parenting because it lets our child know, I hear you. I see you. I see where you're coming from. And like recognize what your feelings are. And it's important to, especially when they're really little, help them understand what that feeling is. I see that you're really mad. I see that you're really sad. And then validating just, I know you want a cookie. Cookies are so delicious, right? Saying something like that instead of like, no, you can't have a cookie. Stop crying, right? You're going to get a much better response from your child if you validate their feelings before holding any sort of boundary.
Yeah. And that transitions well into the tantrum area and your tips related to how to handle the child who's on the floor and just can't be consoled.
Hey, Alyssa here. I'm just popping in to tell you about our course called Becoming. Becoming a Mother is your guide to a confident pregnancy and birth, all in a convenient 6-week online program. From birth plans to sleep training and everything in between, you'll gain the confidence and skills you need for a smooth transition to motherhood. You'll get live coaching calls with Kristin and myself, a bunch of expert videos, including chiropractic care, pelvic floor physical therapy, mental health experts, breastfeeding, and much more. You'll also get a private Facebook community with other mothers going through this at the same time as you to offer support and encouragement when you need it most. And then, of course, you'll also have direct email access to me and Kristin, in addition to the live coaching calls. If you'd like to learn more about the course, you can email us at info@goldcoastdoulas.com or check it out at thebecomingcourse.com. We'd love to see you there.
Yep. And so, like I mentioned, the first thing with tantrums, and again, these can be really triggering for us as adults too, especially if we're feeling low on reserves, but still staying calm is just so important because it truly is adding like gas to a fire if we get really upset. And so stay calm. And another thing that's important here is when your child is having a tantrum, recognizing they are not coming from a place where it's premeditated, right? When children are having tantrums, their logical brain has been shut down and they are more operating on that emotional, more primitive brain, right? And so like trying to create logic, right? And talk to them about their feelings and be logical with them and expect logic from them is just not capable. Until they've calmed down, they can't really hear a lot of what we're saying. So if we stay calm and also limit our words, oftentimes when our children are tantruming, we're trying to talk it through with them and trying to figure it out in the moment. And sometimes it's better to just say, like, I see that you're really mad right now. And I understand, mommy's here if you need me, right? I'm right here. When you're ready for a hug, you let me know, and just kind of leave it at that. That's also going to allow your child to regulate better because you're just there calm, being there in presence, and we're not talking a ton about it, which can really create that tantrum going on much longer than it needs to.
Excellent.
Uh-huh.
So, what other tips do you have for our listeners related to behavior issues?
Yeah. So, kind of on that same vein of like handling tantrums, timeout is a really like highly debated topic, right? And
Yes.
I'm a fan of timeout because timeout truly means like to just rest, like take a break, right? That's what it means. And so when our children are in a really heightened state, sometimes they do need a timeout, but it's not like the traditional timeout where you think like, oh, you're going in your room to think about your behavior. Because oftentimes when we try to do that, our child feels more isolated, and that can really amp things up even more. And so I'm a big fan of putting together like a peaceful pillow or cozy corner, someplace where our children can go to calm themselves down. That's not a negative place. It's in like the main living area. And they can go there if you see that your child is about to go into a tantrum phase, right? You can do that in advance. Like, I see that we're starting to get really mad. Let's go sit together and read a book or something like that. Sometimes we can preemptively get in front of it. And sometimes unless a child is really breaking a golden rule, and golden rules are, I will not hurt myself, I will not hurt others, and I will not destroy property. I'm not a fan of like sending them necessarily to timeout as a punitive way of doing things. But if they are breaking one of those golden rules, I do think that they need some time in a spot that's a positive place. It's not just a negative place, and they're not isolated, to tell their body to stop that behavior.
Right.
It's not safe. And then once they've stopped the behavior and they come out of timeout, just focusing on what went right. You told your body to stop hitting. Like, great job. Do you want to come help me do X, right? Something like that. We don't want to punish because that's not how our children learn. But once everything is really calm is when we have the opportunity for teachable moments, right? Our children are
Right.
going to make a ton of mistakes. That's part of it. We've all gone through the process of making mistakes, right? I've made millions of mistakes, throughout my life. And that's part of how our children learn. So they have to make mistakes, and we have to let them make mistakes so that they can learn from it. And so if the child has been throwing or hitting or kicking, that's when you can talk about like, what could we do instead, right? Like, that really hurt my body. Next time you're feeling really mad, can't hit. That's not safe. Love myself too much for you to let me to hit you. And I love you too much to let anyone hit you, right? So what could we do instead next time when you're feeling really angry? You could, a younger child, you could say, you can stomp your feet and say, I'm really mad, right? Give them approved behaviors and ways of expressing those big feelings. And then if the child has kind of broken golden rule, sometimes we have to help them figure out how to make it right, whether that's a logical or natural consequence. And so natural consequences are like cause and effect, right? You threw something and it broke, and now I need you to help me fix it. Another thing is if a child hit another child, could be, I always say to my sons, how can we make this right? And at first, I had to help them figure out ways that they could make it right. Like, if that person wants a hug, do you want to give them a hug? Do you want to say, I'm sorry? Do you want to color a picture? Right? Those are different ways I've helped them. And now I ask them that same question. And I'm like, how do you want to make this right with that person? And they've come to the place where they can actually make those decisions and figure that out for themselves.
I love that so much, Christine.
Yeah. And it's important because that's how we truly change behavior, is if the child has logical or natural consequences, is where they learn, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't want to have to keep doing that. I don't want
Right.
to do that again. And when you've given them other tools and other ways of doing things, it might take a little while for them to get there, but you're going to be so proud when instead of hitting, they've said, like, I don't like that. I'm really angry. Right. And that's when, as parents, we're like, oh, this hard work's working.
Yes. So, how do you navigate technology? You mentioned screens off near bedtime and on the floor play, but I feel like that is a common issue for parents of younger, like toddlers, as well as older kids, because there's so much, even in school, related to working on computers and technology, and it's a part of our lives now.
Yeah. So I am not the technology police at home. I have read all of the studies. I know the benefits and the downfalls. We do live in such a technology focused, society. And I do understand it's addicting for not just children, but it can be the same for adults. And so,
Yeah.
for younger kids, I think following, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations overall is helpful, good, positive guidance. And as they get a little bit older, they're allowed to have a little bit more, but also ensuring that lots of breaks are happening in between. And we've been through phases. One of my sons has ADHD, and which means that his brain is wired for what he's interested in, and he's interested in technology. And so we've gone through phases where we've had to go on more of a technology diet than others because the behavior that was resulting from having too much screen time. But I think as parents, we're just trying to strike the balance and reevaluating as time goes on. Like my husband and I, for a long time, had a no technology during the week policy, and that didn't mean TV because but it's more like games and screens. But my children have gotten to a place where they're 9.5 now, and they're better at like turning it off and going and doing other things, and just instead of staying on it all the time. And when they're asked to get off of it, it's not a big struggle. And so we've actually recently loosened up a little bit more so they get a little bit of screen time at home during the week. And at this age, it's so important for them to connect with their friends. And so that's one way that they're able to do it. And so I think it's just reevaluating as our kids get older, like what makes sense for your family, how your child reacts to technology, and making your rules based on your own specific child and your family's philosophies.
Very helpful. So, what other questions are you seeing from your clients related to behavior that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I think another one is not listening. Lots of like, how do I get my child to listen better? And this is a big one. And I mean, let's be honest, as moms, nothing is more frustrating than repeating yourself 1,000 times. Am I right?
Yes.
It's like
Even as
you're like,
teenagers, I feel like I'm still repeating myself. My 13-year-old.
oh, for sure. And I mean, and usually they're like distracted with technology, right?
Yes.
I always like when I feel like this is what I feel like I look like when my kids aren't listening and I'm repeating myself over and over again is like the cartoons where like the steam used to come out of the ears and the head started like popping off the body. That's how I
Yes.
oftentimes am feeling inside. But there are things that we can do to really get our children to listen better that like they just play into kind of like looking at like things from like a respectful standpoint, right? So if we're constantly like ordering and directing and we're just focused on like almost like that authoritarian, right? Like do as I say, don't question me. Oftentimes you will find that when you take that approach, that children don't listen as much. They tend to shut down a lot. So number one is ensuring you've got that strong connection, because if our kids don't feel connected to us, they're not going to listen to us. It's kind of like thinking about like, do you have a friend who like isn't respectful to you? Are you going to take their advice when they try to talk to you about something? Probably not. You're going to tune them out a little bit more, right? So I think about
Right.
that with our, like just making sure that you have that connection, making sure that you're giving lots of love and affection and attention and spending time together, focusing and being interested in what they're interested in, having that legitimate, true like relationship and connection. And that really opens up the ears, because even think about it in your own relationships, right? Like with your spouse or your partner, if you guys aren't connected, oftentimes like the communication just isn't there, right? We're less likely to hear what the other person's saying in the way that they meant to say it. Does that make sense?
Exactly. It
Yeah.
does. Very
Um,
helpful.
and the other thing, I have many things about this, but oftentimes, like the most popular, especially when we have toddlers and young preschoolers, I felt like I was trying to keep my twin boys alive all the time when they were younger. So my most popular words coming out of my mouth felt like no, stop, and don't. And so, but then when I like started doing more behavior work and I started thinking about it, like when I have someone, even though our children and they're young, they still, when they hear no, stop, and don't all of the time, they're going to tune us out a little bit more. And so when we actually need it, when we're in like a safety situation where they're running away from us us in the park, like in the parking lot, if we always say no, stop, and don't, they might disregard us when it's a true safety issue, right? And
Right.
also, so we want to kind of reserve those. And there's different ways to say no without saying no. This can decrease tantrums as well. And so, can I have a cookie? What's our natural inclination? No, I'm making dinner, right? Temper tantrum down on the floor. But if
Yes.
you say yes, after dinner, you can have a cookie. So you've said no without saying no. You've just told them when they can have it, right? I want ice cream. Oh, I know. Validate the feeling. Ice cream is so delicious, but today's already been an ice cream day, right? So tomorrow can be another ice cream day, right? And so you're saying no without actually saying no. That works really, really well. Lots of yes and. I always think about this. I do this with my husband. I'll be thinking, obviously we have different upbringings, different minds, and he'll have one idea of way to do things and I'll have my idea, right? And if I
Yeah.
were to say to him, like, that's a stupid idea, we should do it my way, he's going to shut down, right? Not going to be listening to me. Whereas if I say,
Absolutely.
yes, we could do it that way, or we could do it this way, right? He's going to be more open and receptive to thinking about the way that I think that we should do it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent tips.
Yeah.
So, what would it be like for our listeners or our doula clients to work with you and your team at Bella Luna Family?
Yeah. So essentially, what we do is when we start working with a family, we always start by having you fill out an intake form. And that's where we collect lots of different information because we like to look at every situation holistically. So we're looking at everything from sleep, behavior, potty training, nutrition, where the parents are at. And so that's how we start everything. And then from there, we meet with families one-on-one and we have conversation about the most challenging aspects that are happening about whether it's potty training or sleep or behavior. And we kind of have a conversation and share insight and educate on what's normal, and parents leave there with action steps on what they can do. And we like to try to keep it really simple, so you're working on some small things and small things can really help improve. And then if we're continually working with people, we build on those skills as time goes on.
Excellent. And you can be found all over social media and your website, bellalunafamily.com. So where would you like to direct our listeners?
I'm thinking I will add a freebie. So if we could add that to the show notes, if people want to download, I have a Taming Tantrums checklist. That tends to be a great way. So if people want more insight about that topic and also to get on our mailing list, I send newsletters every other week filled with lots of good insight. And so if you want to add that to the show notes, I can give you the download link for that.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Kristin.
You're so very welcome.
Love chatting with you again, and we will definitely add that to the show notes. What a great resource for all of our listeners.
Thank you, Kristin. It was so great chatting with you again.
Good to chat with you. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Ask the Doulas. For more information about Gold Coast Doulas, visit us on our website, goldcoastdoulas.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give us a 5-star review. Thank you. Remember, these moments are golden.